very much. So I would like to welcome Walter, Inny, and Eluza to this panel today. It's a pleasure to have you here. We're really happy, that we decided to do this panel together, and it's amazing to celebrate Freire's 100th birth. So yeah, thank you very much for that. We were going to start the panel with a presentation that Eluza is going to give us today. So she will be singing and reciting a poem. She's going to be doing that in Portuguese. And then what we're going to do, we're going to share a screen where we have the Portuguese and the English together. And then you can follow and trying to understand what she's saying. And it's a very beautiful presentation as well. Then after that, we're gonna have, I don't know who's going to go first, Walter or Inny. We're gonna have a beautiful presentation. Would you like to go first, Walter or Inny? Inny, would you like to go?
As you prefer.
Yeah, okay. So let's do a Inny after, and then you can close, Walter. So I'll just very briefly here read a little bit of Inny's bio. So yeah, Dr. Inny Accioly is a professor of education at the Fluminense Federal University in Brazil. Her research focuses on critical pedagogy in a multidisciplinary perspective that relates environmental education, grassroots movements, policy analysis, and international and comparative education. She's the program chair of the Paulo Freire interest group of the AERA, American Education Research Association. She's editing a book. Actually, it's already been launched, yeah? With Dr. Donald Macedo, the upcoming book, Education, Equality, and Justice in the New Normal Global Responses to the Pandemic. I would also like to introduce Walter Omar Kohan, who I have the pleasure to meet again here. So we met at Concordia a few years ago in person, and hopefully in the near future, we're going to be able to meet in person again. So that's very nice to see you again, Walter. So Dr. Walter Oman Kohan received his doctorate from Iberoamericana University in Mexico City in 1996. His mentor was Matthew Lipman. He did postdoctoral studies in philosophy at the University of Paris. Dr. Kohan was a research fellow at the EPCD at the University of British Columbia in 2017 and 18. He has also been visiting professor at different universities in Italy, France, Argentina, Mexico, and Chile. Since 2002, he has been a full professor of philosophy of education at the State University of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Since 2000, he's a senior research member of the National Council of Scientific and Technology Development and of the Foundation of Support of Research of the State of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Since 2003, he has been the director of the Center of Studies in Philosophy of Childhood in the state of the University of Rio de Janeiro. I would also like to introduce Eluza. So Eluza is a master's student in adult education at the Université de Québec à Montréal. She has recently finished a graduate diploma in adult education at the same university. Eluza has taught in many levels of formal and non-formal education in Brazil and Quebec. Presently, Eluza volunteers for Bienvenue Project, an arts-based education project for refugee children. Her research focuses on storytelling and women educators. So as we mentioned earlier, so Eluza will be performing a song to open the panel and reciting a poem as well. So Eluza, the floor is yours. I will be sharing right now my screen. And let's see if that works. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Hi, everyone. Yeah. Thank you, Marlon. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Marlon, to organize this amazing panel. I'm so proud to be here. And I will start in singing a small part of a song of a really important woman in Brazil. the symbol of resistance. Her name is Elza Soares. And eu não vou sucumbir, eu não vou sucumbir, avisar na hora que tremer o chão. Amiga, amigo, é agora, segura minha mão, eu não vou sucumbir. And when I thinking that I don't want to fall, I always think about the pedagogy of inclusion, and I prepared this poesia for you and for him. 19 foi o dia, setembro, o mês. 1921 foi o ano escolhido para sua vez. Nascendo em berço gentil, não sucumbiu. Crescendo em uma família crítica, nunca aceitou altivez. Quando já sabia andar, a morte tocou seu lar. Mas não deixou a utopia para lá. Ao contrário disso, virou seu motivo para lutar. Ainda um jovem homem com uma educação bancária se deparou. Viu muitos oprimidos, e isso causou muita dor. Ele então compreendeu que o caminho era a emancipação. E que apenas com diálogo encontraria a solução. Denunciando a educação bancária que era usada para domesticar, a educação emancipadora veio anunciar. Para seu experimento, o oprimido camponês procurou. Com sua utopia, 300 homens liberou. O golpe militar tentou lhe podar. Expulso do seu lar, passou a voar. Com seu olhar libertário, recomeçou a ensinar, sem jamais se esquecer que aprender é também ensinar. Aos 4 cantos do mundo, disse que a educação que deposita busca a memorização, que a educação que dialoga busca a conscientização, e que a bancária busca dividir, a dialógica busca unir. Foi ele quem nos disse que só com a educação podemos nos transformar. Lembrou que se queremos homens e mulheres livres, se queremos liberdade, o parto dolorido é preciso vivenciar. Partos dificultosos e doloridos fazem nascer homens novos, fazem nascer mulheres novas. E libertam gêneros novos. Como representante do poder popular, lembrou que todos devem se emancipar e que não cabe aos homens as mulheres liberar, carregando sua marca de que só com o diálogo podemos a educação transformar. E ele nos deixou o legado de que a emancipação é para todos, sem congênero se importar. Ao abrir os olhos do camponês para a palavra geradora, ele iniciou a luta para uma educação estimuladora. E, acima de tudo, uma educação que pudesse todos embarcar. E com esse pensamento, ele nos deixou esperançar. E para você que não sabe de quem estou a falar, eu te digo com orgulho, Paulo Freire eu vou gritar, pois são seus 100 anos de existência que estamos a comemorar. Presentemente eu posso me considerar uma mulher de sorte, porque apesar de muito moça, me sinto sã e salva e forte. E tenho comigo pensado que Deus é brasileiro e anda do meu lado, e assim já não posso morrer no ano passado. Tenho sangrado demais, Tenho chorado pra cachorro. Ano passado eu morri, mas este ano eu não morro. Tenho sangrado demais, tenho chorado pra cachorro. Ano passado eu morri, mas este ano eu não morro. Ano passado eu morri, mas este ano eu não morro. So, Paulo Freire left to us his great legacy, that the sun belongs to all of us. So we have the right to seek the same sun for me, for you, for everybody. Eu vou buscar o mesmo sol. E te convido junto. Pra não me contentar com luzes de farol. Eu vou buscar o mesmo sol. Pra não me contentar com luzes de farol. Eu vou. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup d'être là. Je suis vraiment contente de participer de cette belle présentation. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Obrigada.
Wow, that's all I can say. Is wow. Thank you, Eluza. Thank you so much. That's beautiful. Okay, so Inny, whenever you're ready.
Eluza, I was not prepared for this. I'm speechless. Wow, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for your beautiful voice, your beautiful words, your beautiful poetry, and your beautiful presence in this world. Thank you, thank you. Wow. Wow, good afternoon, everybody. Wow, I'm deeply touched. Wow, I'm so honored to have this opportunity to meet you all, Eluza, Walter, Marlon. Wow, and many congratulations for the organizers of this graduate symposium. It's a very important initiative of creating spaces of knowledge production, of sharing experiences. And also it's an important space to reaffirm the importance of Freire legacy. This kind of democratic spaces in which we can dialogue, spaces that reaffirm the importance of education and science. More than ever, we need these spaces to face the fascist, the ultra-conservative, the anti-scientific waves that are gaining power all over the world with racist and xenophobic discourses, hate speeches. So I see this space here as a space for creating hope, constructing utopia, what Freire called the untested feasibility. And what is most important, it's a space for creating solidarity among educators, solidarity and support, because critical thinking is under attack. It means that there is an articulated attempt to impose the dictatorship of the homogeneous thinking that creates common enemies. For example, the idea that refugees and asylum seekers represent threats to the United States and the European Union citizens, while these people seek asylum precisely because their lives are threatened by the US and the European Union policies that finance wars, coup d'etat, policies that finance the misery of entire populations in Africa, in Latin America, and in the peripheries of the global South. Almost 80,000 million people across the globe are forcibly displaced. And once they arrive in the US or in Greece, for example, they are deemed into substandard housing, detention centers, refugee camps, tent cities, places that in general lack safety conditions such as sanitation and sewer systems, places with no medical care. And these poor conditions turn these places as very dangerous places where the possibility of the spread of the coronavirus is very high. And the coronavirus pandemic has been used as justification for the government to through on asylum laws. For example, Trump administration used the threat of the coronavirus pandemic to legally expel refugee and asylum seekers or stop them at the border. This tactic of creating an external enemy fuels a permanently militarized society, and dividing people is a successful strategy to reproduce oppression. So it is an intentionally widespread, the feeling that the problem is not the elites and the transnational corporation that profits from human misery. It is intentionally designed and spread in social media, the feeling of hatred against our neighbors, against the minority, against those who are somehow different from us. But we are all humans, and all humans must have their rights respected and assured. Paulo Freire hasn't experienced the era of the social media, but in his works, he developed tools to critically analyze the media and identify the often hidden mechanisms of domination. That's why Freire's legacy is under attack in Brazil. In Brazil, the fascist, the ultra-neoliberal conservative right is in power. It is an expression of the alliances between the neoliberal right and the authoritarian radical right. Some of them criticizes human rights policies, expression aversion to social movements. Some prosecute teachers for allegedly indoctrinating students with gender ideology or cultural Marxism. Some of them put forward the defense of the military dictatorship and the justification of torture. And for all of them, Paulo Freire is the responsible for moral degradation. The coronavirus crisis unveils the obscene degree of inequality, intolerance, racism, the obscene degree of exploitation of workers, and also the coronavirus pandemic unveils the contempt that the rulers have for people's lives. The Brazilian president is working in favor of the virus. He makes public speeches against the use of protective masks, for example. He threatens governors and mayors who enact lockdown. More than 270,000 people have died from coronavirus in Brazil. It's a real genocide. And last week, the Brazilian president said, using these words, "Stop all this fussing and whining. How long are you going to keep on crying?" This is sadistic. This is the highest level of dehumanization that a human being can achieve. Why do Brazilian people accept this? During this genocide, the government approval rate is around 40%. The approval rate amongst the group of the unemployed and people without stable income is around 36%. These are the ones who are forced to take crowded public transportation, trying to find ways for surviving. the ones that depend on overcrowded public hospitals. In my view, Freire's concept of banking education is very important to analyze this situation, because this is the tragic result of a massive system of banking education. Banking education is the concept that Freire used to describe the type of education that ultimately kills life. This is a kind of education that transforms subjects into passive objects, a kind of education that deposits static content on students, an education that kills curiosity, kills the love for the act of knowing. It reaffirms competition. It reproduces inequality, oppression. It kills the ability to dream and act to transform this unjust society. The expansion of the massive banking education system increased the school enrollment rates, but banking education also made it possible to increase the exploitation of workers. So I am trying to analyze, to understand why did this fascist government come to power in Brazil? Why is this president still in power? In my view, it's not possible to ignore the nefarious path that the banking education system has taken towards the barbarism. In Brazil, the banking education system led to a situation in which there is an educated generation that ignores the Brazilian history. In my view, this can partly explain why some groups claim for the return of the military dictatorship, which in Brazil went from 1964 to 1985. There is also an educated generation that ignores the basic fundamentals of science. That's why many people reply anti-scientific discourses during this tragic pandemic. It is an attempt against their own lives. And there is an educated generation that cannot critically analyze the news, the difference between facts and opinions. This is a perfect scenario for fake news. So banking education transforms the right to education into the right of having a certification, a degree. What does it mean to consider education as a right? I understand that the right to education is related to all human rights. Banking education restricts the right to education merely to receiving degrees, certifications. It has serious impacts on the assurance of human rights of all humans. Also, banking education causes serious impacts on nature. This education defines how we learn to relate to the environment and to the other living beings. Banking education plays an important role in the dehumanizing process driven by the neoliberal capitalism. The act of knowing with the purpose of humanization, of being more, in Freire's words, presupposes a dialogical situation. The real dialogue is not the exchange of words. It involves gestures and affections that are collectively constructed and cannot be restricted to teacher-student relationship. And precisely for this reason, I understand that a teaching learning process that takes place remotely or online without the presence that enables these rich and complex human interactions, this kind of education, the online education, cannot be dialogical. It can be a critical education, but not a truly dialogical education. Because while it breaks the temporal and the spatial dimensions that connect people, it reinforces individualism. It has grave and serious consequences for democracy. For example, when teachers get together face to face, they can openly talk about their working conditions, their wages, the exploitation of teachers' work. They can organize themselves into unions. When students get together face to face, they can mobilize in defense of democracy, of public and quality education. We cannot forget that one of the military dictatorship strategies in Brazil was to prohibit people from gathering groups. Also, online learning restricts education to content delivery. It is an online banking education. How many school and university students are unable to access real-time discussions with their teachers and their colleagues? There are internet connections problems. Many students lack technological equipment. Many families face unemployment. Many students and teachers are suffering from mental illness. These are some problems that teachers and students are facing worldwide. How many students are condemned to stay behind and give up studying? In Brazil, our best universities are the public universities, and they are completely free. Over the past 10 years, the access of low-income students to federal university has increased so that more than 50% of the federal university students are the first in their family to attend an university. The Brazilian federal constitution states that the public universities are based on teaching, research, and extension. Extension involves activities in which academic knowledge interacts with community knowledge. This is important for the university to carry out its social function of facing the social problems in favor of the public good, not the private interests. And Freire was an important defender of the public and free university, of the public good, of democracy at universities and schools. He was a defender of the importance of the grassroots movement. Also, he acted to strengthen the national student movement, the National Student Union. In Pedagogy of Freedom, Freire affirmed that the kind of education that does not recognize the right to express appropriate anger against injustice, against disloyalty, against the negation of love, against exploitation, against the violence, fails to see the educational role implicit in the expression of these feelings. It's time to express appropriate anger, to recognize how important it is for democracy. We must teach and learn how to transform the appropriate anger into revolutionary consciousness so that we can find alternative ways against the current exacerbated individualism that is taught at neoliberal schools and universities. This is only possible by democratizing access to public and free basic and higher education for the popular classes, the minorities, the marginalized. I understand that the grassroots movements, the peasant and the indigenous movements, the feminist movements, the Black movements, the unions, the movements for environmental justice, they must have active and permanent presence in schools and universities in such a way that teachers and students can join them and learn about self-organization, tolerance, respect for divergent thinking, learn strategies of struggle and claim. I've been defending that these dark times we are facing imposes the necessity to revolutionize education by constructing what I am calling a curriculum for survival and resistance, to face the historical threat to lives and dignity of the Black and Mestizo people, the indigenous communities, the communities in the global ghettos, to fight against the police brutality, the forced displacement of entire communities, the land grabbing, the violence against women and LGBT people, to fight against the transnational corporation of mining, agribusiness that devastate the Latin American and the African countries. It's time to construct a life-centered education with a curriculum radically focused on the people's fight to rights and against all forms of oppression. This is our challenge as critical educators committed with the fight for a more human, just, and solidary world. So once again, thank you for this opportunity to be here to celebrate Freire's centenary. Paulo Freire, presente. Freire is alive. Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you very much, Inny. Yeah, very powerful speech, very meaningful as well. It definitely makes us reflect and push us towards action as well. Thank you very much, Inny, for that. And let's start with, continue with Walter then. Walter, whenever you're ready. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Marlon. Good afternoon to everyone. Well, here is afternoon. It has been really powerful, Inny. I can imagine if it has been like this, how it could be with your body and in presence. You have transmitted such a strong energy in this online virtual world that I am so much looking forward to listen to you really. and also Eluza, thank you so much for your poetry, your music, your sensitivity, and your emotions. One day I will like to talk to you about 2 unconscious errors that you made while reading the poem. I'm laughing because they are errors in a very special sense. That instead of reading humanos, you read homens, and instead of reading mujer, instead of reading sofrer, você leu morrer. E dia falamos disso. Mas foi muito bonito, erros muito bonitos, entre aspas, erros. Very meaningful mistakes. And thank you, Marlon. It's great to re-encounter you. In spite of these horrible moments, we were so lucky and happy when we met, and we didn't know about that in 2018. And yeah, as Inny told, Brazil is under an awful moment. It's unbelievable that we have gone through this in not so many years. We were in such different time, like 5 years ago. And it's unbelievable. Like yesterday, for example, 2,200 people died, more or less. So imagine now, while we are speaking now, every minute, like 2 people are dying. So after this intervention, after this meeting, we will have less 150 Brazilians, more or less. It's really hard. And to these people, I'm sure we would all like to give our talks and our emotions and our thoughts. And we hope this finishes more sooner than later, because sometimes it seems that it's difficult to overcome, to accept. And also the context of pandemia makes it harder, even harder. So, but I don't want to put the energy down that Inny and Eluza put so high. I'm not so sure I will going to be able to maintain it at that level of energy, but at least to give you some words or some ideas, and maybe some music in the end to remain hopeful and to stay thinking that there's always something to do. I think that's also Freire, that maybe in Freirean, maybe that in these special difficult moments, it's especially important not to give up and to continue hoping and giving some fight. I also was thinking about the inequalities and the Inny described them so well. But I was thinking, I don't know if you know, but probably you know. But for example, I've read that in Canada, there are like 5 vaccines for each Canadian or for each inhabitant. So you have 5 times the number of people in terms of vaccines. While in Brazil, we probably have 5 times people, the number of vaccines. So you have 5 vaccines for each person, and we have 5 persons for 1 vaccine. And this is just an example of how it seems that as Inny described, the pandemic have made it especially easy for neoconservative and fascist governments as we have in Brazil. So how we confront this? How can Freire inspires us? I would so much like to hear more about Inny's curriculum for survival and resistance. I'm very curious. But I think that in that direction, I would like to share some words of how can we celebrate Freire today? How can we give new birth to his ideas, some of his ideas? Remembering that Freire said that if we want to be Freireans, we need to reinvent him. So that if we want to be Freireans, we don't need to repeat him or to reproduce him, but recreate him. Which is a paradox, because for saying this, we need to repeat him. We need to echo him. I've just said Freire says, so it's an interesting thing. So how can we recreate Freire? I have been thinking about this in the last years, and especially about the idea that Freire stresses about the education as political. So that Freire says that the education is not that it has a political dimension. He's more radical, more strong. Education is political. So that the educator is a politician. And in what sense can we understand this? And what meaning can we give for this? So I think that in this time, in this such a difficult time, we need to recreate this idea. We need to rethink what does it mean to be a politician. What does it mean that education is politician? And I would propose like 5 words to rethink this idea, just to propose and just to give some food for thinking. And I know that we have some specific time, so I'll try to be short, and hopefully we can talk about all this later in dialogue. So one idea is connected to Inny's, that says that her curriculum for survivance as resistance is life-centered. So I think that life is very important these days, so that there's a politic of life, or an appeal to affirm life in different ways, and especially in schools, but also in the informal system or in the informal practices, where sometimes we are tempted to live life aside or to live life outside school. And school can be school, but could be university or any educational environment. So Inny also stressed so well how universities have 3 dimensions of research, teaching, and extension, and how part of the elitism of university is the privilege of research against extension. And so these needs, I think it's time to open our institutions to life, and open not only to human lives, but also to the life of the planet and to the life of all sorts of species that are now threatened. So I think that there's a politics of life, an affirmation of life, and an affirmation also of difference in terms of life, of no hierarchies in terms of life. And this brings us to the second word, which is equality. Equality for me is important and is a political word, because usually in education we think that equality is an end. So we think that we are educating for equality. So we are inhabiting inequality societies, and we think that through education we are going to bring equality. But I think that when we think like this, when we put education and equality in that place, we reproduce the inequality from where we start. So we translate equality to the infinite, but we never actualize. And I think there's a kind of equality, I would call it pedagogical equality, that needs to be affirmed from the beginning, not as something that we foster, but as something that we need to presuppose in a critical or problematizing education, not in a banking education, as Inny said. So what does it mean that we presuppose equality in education? It means that we consider that any human being is equally able to learn anything if the proper conditions are given to her. So that there's no more capable and less capable, pedagogically. So it's again this discourse, usually against the popular classes, saying that no, they cannot, or they are not able, or don't try because they will never be able, or it's useless. They haven't been born for this, or this is not the place for them. So we need to resist this and affirm that pedagogically, again, anyone is equally capable of learning anything. So that's a political principle. So it's not about what we are going to gain or to arrive. It's from where we begin, from where we start. And I think that the problem is that many popular educators have been educated like in a banking system, as Inny said, to reproduce the kind of inequality that they should be confronting. We can talk about this more. Then the third word is love, which also Inny, I think I'm just repeating Inny or just commenting Inny in another way, because all these words were mentioned by her. So the third word is love. But love not only or not mainly as a feeling, as a personal feeling, not only as I love him or her, but love especially as a faith, we could say, or an emotion that the world can be reborn again and again. So love as relying, faithing, believing, feeling that the world can start again and again and again. So love, not mainly as a personal feeling, but as a love to the position of educator, and as a faith that being an educator, you can help others to re-begin a new world, or to transform the world in a way that the world can be lived in a new way. So love as a generative force, I would say, more than a personal feeling. Remember the last words of the pedagogy of the oppressed, the ending. I know that in English, and I don't know why, but in English they have cut this last paragraph, wonderful paragraph of the pedagogy of oppressed, and they have put it in the preface, in the forward. In Paulo Freire wrote, like in the only English edition of the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, this last phrase was cut from the end of the book and was introduced as the last paragraph of the preface, of the forward. I'm still trying to find out why, and I promise one day I will know, but till now I haven't. And this last phrase said that if nothing remains, and also it has been changed a little in English, because in Portuguese what it says is that if nothing remains from these pages, at least the faith in a world where it will be less difficult to love. In the English translations, it says where it will be easier to love, which is not the same as less difficult. But love is the world with which Paulo Freire finishes the pedagogy of the oppressed. So it's all education is about love. The fourth word is errantry. An errantry, which is an ancient English word, has to do with at least two main meanings. One, to err in the sense of making mistakes, to err in the sense that we usually use in education. So usually for the students, you made a mistake, so I will, in a banking education, I will mark you, grade you, and evaluate you. And for Freire, mistakes were very important. Were not problems, quite the contrary, were affirmative things. We learn because we make mistakes. And especially the teacher make mistakes. So to make mistakes is very important, to err in this sense. But also erring in the sense of wandering, in the sense of traveling, in the sense of deplacing. Banking education, as Inny described it, the teacher thinks that she knows something that the student does not know, so she needs to transfer the knowledge she has on the ones that don't have. But in a more interesting education, it's not the teacher who make the others move their position, but who moves herself, who travels herself. Because in a more interesting education, teaching is about deplacing, it's about listening the others. It's about listening the other knowledges, but also the others of knowledge, the excluded from knowledge. So the first one who needs to deplace herself is the teacher, not only or not mainly or not first the students. So so teaching has to be with erring, with wandering. And I like the word wandering because when you wander, it's not that you don't know where you go, but you know that in order to really go, to really move yourself, to really travel, you need not to anticipate the destiny of the travel. So you need to know that you don't know where you're going to arrive traveling. Because if you know, it's not about education. It's about instruction, about banking education. So this is a very important political dimension, I think, for a liberating or emancipatory education. That the teacher travels, air, wander herself with her students, open and attentive to the signs of the path that they are traveling. And finally, I know that I might have used more time than I should have, so I'm finishing. Childhood. And childhood is probably the more surprising word with Paulo Freire, because Freire didn't occupy himself too much about childhood. So Freire was mainly worried about the education of adults and youth, especially illiterate adults. So the peasants, the excluded, and the campaigns, Freire campaigns in Africa and Latin America, etc., and even the first experiment in Angicos were all with adults or youth, but were not with children. Freire was not too much occupied with children. But I think that Freire, even though he was not so much occupied with the education of chronological children, Freire gave childhood an extraordinary place. And he reconsidered childhood not as something we educate, but as something that educates us. So it's not about forming childhood. Education is not about preparing childhood to be future adults, etc., as we usually say. But education is about listening to childhood. It's about remembering childhood and taking care and keeping our childhood alive, no matter how old we are. And this brings us to time, because usually we think childhood as we think time, and I don't have chronological time to unfold all this, but I want to say that for Freire, at least there are two kinds of time. One is the time of the clock, of the calendar, of chronos, the time of seconds, years, minutes, the quantitative measure of time, the calendar. And that's the time of the institution, of school as institution, of the curricula also, of the ministries of education, of the chronograms, of the planning, of the aims, of the objectives. All that is measured by chronos, and all that happens in chronos. But I think that Freire also teaches us that the main time of education is not chronos, it's not chronological. So that the education has a political task also in making possible the experience of another time, which is not the time of the clock, which is not the time of the market, which is not the time of labor, of the exploitation, but is the free time of a child that plays, or of adults that we gather to make questions and problematize the world together. So the political task is also about inventing time, about creating the conditions so that we can move from the time of oppression and productivity to the time of play, and to the time of joy, and to the time of questioning, of love, of errantry, and of life. And I think it's too much for today, for me speaking, and I hope you feel inspired and we can continue talking and dialogue about these ideas. And I have some music for you, but we can listen to that in the end.
Okay, yeah. So let's open the floor for questions and comments, yeah, and see what we have here, and then I would like also you to mention the recently published books. You both have just published new books as well, so if you could also tell us a little bit about it as well. And yeah, let's see. Whoever has got questions, you can write in the chat or in the or you can raise your hand, and I will open the microphone so that you can speak. Feel free to ask any question or make any comments. Okay, yeah, so let's wait until people think about it. And I myself have lots of questions, and I have to thank the three of you for such a beautiful presentation and great topics and great celebration of Freire's legacy. My question, I would like to start with Inny. In a sense, Inny, I everything you said really resonated to me in a sense that this is my daily struggle when when I watch the news, when I see, I can see the fear that I have inside myself when I watch the news, or when I talk to my family, how difficult things have been. And I would like to talk to you, to ask you, in a sense, that how where do you find strength? How do you keep up? Because I know that you are very strong and vocal, and your actions speak to you. And how do you find strength and motivation to continue in such dark situation that we're living through right now?
Wow. I find inspiration in my students. My students are everything for me. They give me energy. They make me feel hopeful for a better future. When I meet them, and we are doing online education, remote learning, that's horrible, because I cannot see their faces because their internet connection is horrible. They don't have computers. They use cell phones to watch the classes. So it's painful. It's painful to be part of this kind of education that is exclusionary, that put people apart, that contribute to many students to give up studying, that put the quality of public university in so bad shape. So at the same time that is painful, it's the way that I can in some point find energy, because my students, they are from low-income families, and most of them are the first in their families to be in a university. So they struggle every day for the right to study. So I learn a lot with them, because they have this energy of fighting, because if they don't fight, they don't survive. It's an everyday fight for housing, for food, for work, for studying, against racism, against elitism, university elitism. So against oppression, gender oppression. So they teach me with their everyday struggles. They are my masters. I learn with them a lot. And I have the privilege of learning with them and being with them, trying to construct alternatives. And we are with many projects. We are online because the situation in Brazil is horrible. We cannot do anything face to face. So, but we are doing what we can do, meeting with grassroots movements, talking about oppression, about racism, about decolonization of knowledge, about their everyday struggles, and trying to find ways to survive. Every day is a fight to survive, because mental illness, unemployment, mental illness, physical illness, the pandemic, and all of my students are facing disease because of the time that they spend in front of computer. So their eyes are having problems. So there are too many difficulties that we have no option. We must struggle. So I have the privilege to be with them in this struggle, to learn with them. So all my efforts, my time, my capacities, I focus on their right to study, their right to education, to everything. So their struggles are my struggles, and I find energy and forces during in the act of struggling collectively with them.
That's amazing. Thank you very much, Inny, for your response, and thank you so much. There's a comment from Professor Diane Pesco, and she commented, just a comment to say, I signed on at the start of Walter's talk and appreciate this inspiring webinar. And she comments like, I was writing the word inspiration just when Inny was saying it. That's beautiful. Thank you. Great comment. And we also have a comment from Professor Miranda D'Amico, and she says, thank you all for your passionate presentations. It is so heartening to see how committed you are to emancipatory literacy and education. Amazing comment. Thank you very much, Miranda, for that. Walter, I also would like to ask you a question. You know, it's more like a request. You know, not like questions. Just like for you, because you have written a book recently that is called. I've got this book here. It's Freire in Portuguese. It's Freire more than ever before. So I would like to ask you, why did you decide to write a book on Freire?
Well, it's a nice question and difficult to answer, like the nice questions. So first, the title, which is interesting, because as you said that Mais do que nunca can be translated as more than never or more than ever. And both are very different times, because more than never is any time. If never is no time, more than never could be 1 second, 1 minute, or 1 hour, or any time is more than never. But which time is more than never? More than ever is no time, because ever is all the time. So one time is any time, and the other time is an impossible time. And that's nice, because it makes us think the relationship that we have with time, and then Freire makes us think with time. And also about the impossible and the the impossible time and the impossible education, which brings us to utopia and to hope. Because sometimes some people stress about the possible. Many people say that politics is the realm of the possible, or that we don't need to think about the impossibles, we need to think about the possibilities of education on what is it possible to do. And I think that Freire helps us think that education has much more to do with the impossible than with the possible. That education is, because there are at least two or three forms of the impossible. When you say the impossible, one way of understanding that is what is not possible. So the impossible would be a negation of the possible. And it's like childhood. You know that childhood comes from a Latin word, infans. We have the word infancy in English also. Because that in, the same in of impossible and of infancy, could be understood as a lack. So usually we think childhood, infancy, as what lacks voice. Infant is the one who doesn't speak because it lacks infancy, no voice. Impossible in this sense could be no possible, lack of possible. But as I said before, infancy or childhood could be seen as an affirmative force, not as a lacking. We usually relate to childhood as something that is lacking or that needs to become other things like adult or grow. And the same thing with the impossible. The impossible could be seen as what lacks possibility, but in another sense, as an affirmative voice, as what is needed, the only thing that is needed. Because, for example, it might seem very abstract, but it's very concrete. I think it's very concrete at least. Because, for example, when someone tells us, no, that student cannot learn, for example, because of her history or because she doesn't have whatever, because in their context, she has been disprovided of a number of things. So it's impossible for her to learn. So it is not possible. Well, I think in those cases, it is more important than ever to affirm the impossible. So maybe in those cases, the only thing that matters for an educator is to do what we are said that is impossible. Because of course it is easier to teach the students who have the possibility to learn and who have all the possibilities. But exactly education, I think, is about teaching what they have been neglected and excluded from the possibilities. The ones who have been thrown to the realm of the impossible. So I think that's something that Paulo Freire teaches us. And all this I have tried to unfold in the book. So how Freire teaches us to deal with the possible and the impossible and with the different dimensions of time that crosses us in education. So thank you for the question. And you know that the book is now translated into English. I don't know if you want to share there is a discount code at Bloomsbury. And I don't know if you want to share it.
Yeah, I'll definitely put it in our website, a link for the discount.
Great.
That's 15-20% discount. Yeah,
I think it's 35%.
35. Oh, that's good.
And okay. I send you. And
do you know when the book is being launched in English?
I think it's in April. I think I have a pre-order flyer.
Okay.
So they are accepting pre-orders, but they are going to launch it with there's a re-edition of the Pedagogy of the, Bloomsbury publishes the Pedagogy of the Oppressed and the Pedagogy of Freedom on Hope, and they are like launching in 5 or 4 books next month.
Okay, perfect. And Inny, you're also publishing as well, yes, a book recently.
Yes, it's for pre-order in Bloomsbury website too. It will be launched in October. And I had the honor to edit this book with Dr. Donaldo Macedo. And we had this idea because since the pandemic started, I was feeling how can I do something to understand and to try to face this global situation. So I contacted him and proposed him to edit with me this book. And we invited scholars from different countries to write about the situation, the public responses to coronavirus pandemic in each country. Talking about refugees, crisis, education, remote education, online education. There are authors from Brazil, Chile, Greece, Italy, Malta, UK, US, Canada. And we had the honor to have Noam Chomsky chapter in our book, Henry Giroux chapter, and foreword by Antonia Darder, and very important intellectuals also from Brazil.
That's another coincidence. My book is also forward by Antonia Darder. What's funny?
Yes, she's perfect. So yes, our book tried to create hope, to try to understand the global situation, the inequality that coronavirus pandemic has unveiled, and to critically analyze the global situation, the connections between the parts, the totality, the perspective of totality that Freire talks about also. So yes, it's an attempt to write a history, a memory of these dark times for future generations, but also to try to construct a utopia, to nurture hope, to denounce a new reality. So it was like a way of putting our anger and our appropriate anger in words and to share with the world. So I'm very happy and excited with this book, and honored to be with all these amazing intellectuals.
That's perfect. That's amazing. So we have 5 minutes to conclude. So yeah, you can you have the time now for your final remarks and any final message that you would like to leave today. Who wants to start? If you want Walter to start, or Inny.
I can start because Walter said something about time, and wow, because I've been thinking about time and ancestry, history and ancestry, and the dimension of ancestry in education. So yes, your reflections and your ideas and what you said about the perspective of time that Freire brings to us helped me a lot to think of ancestry in education, and this other time, the time of our ancestrals, and how the ancestrality talks about the present and the future. So thank you for your words and your thoughts. So, well, thank you all for this opportunity, because for me, it's an opportunity of nurturing my hope for a better future, and nurturing my energies, re-energizing me. And so thank you. This moment were very important for me, and I'm happy to be here with you.
Obrigado, Inny. Thank you so much. There is a comment, Marlon, on, I don't know what this is. It here appears like questions and answers. Can I read it?
Absolutely. Go ahead, please.
I don't know if I should, but I think it's, yeah. Marta Teixeira, she writes in Portuguese. And she says, I will write in Portuguese because my English is not so good. My comment is that I very much like the interview with Ludgardes Costa Freire on your book, Paulo Freire More Than Ever, and the importance and the strength of the testimony, and also the chapter on philosophy for children and the politicity of education. And I also find very important to rescue Freire in early childhood education, because usually we think on Freire about the adult education. So thank you so much, Marta Teixeira. Obrigado, Marta. So yeah, she's mentioning there's an interview with the youngest son of Paulo Freire in the book, which works in the library of the Paulo Freire Institute. And I think it's very important because it's also about his life and not only about his theory. And I'm also very thankful to you all. It's funny because Inny doesn't live so far from my house, but I met her in Concordia University. I'm very happy about that. Also to have met Eluza and Marlon, very thankful to you all. And we can share the music if you, do we have still 4 minutes? I think it's a nice way of ending.
Go ahead, no problem, yes.
So let me share here. Okay. Okay, it should. Are you seeing now? It's okay? No.
Yeah. Yes.
But I think I haven't pressed, there's one button I should have pressed concerning this sound. Let me just do it again to be sure that it will go with good. Okay. I think now it will go. Okay?
Em Angicos, uma pequena cidade no sertão do Rio Grande do Norte, à beira da antiga estrada de ferro, começaram uma revolução. A Revolução de Angicos foi iniciada para acabar com o analfabetismo, o problema básico do Estado.
O menino lê o mundo, olha o céu e risca o chão, traça a linha do horizonte, silencia, vai à fonte, dança solto na amplidão. Brinca, canta, segue, vive, vai crescendo o homem livre sob o sol de Jaboatão. No Recife se fez mestre, em Angicos ele acende um farol que vai bem fundo, uma luz feita pro mundo de uma nova educação. Canta belamente Sua voz se faz canção, seu olhar abre horizontes, guarda a força da semente, vive o mestre em quem aprende, esperançar por esse chão. Vamos reaprender o Brasil,
esperançar por esse chão.
vamos reencantar a nação,
Esperançar por esse chão.
vamos cantar a vida de novo. Paulo Freire morre não. Vamos reaprender o Brasil,
Esperançar por esse chão.
vamos reencantar a nação,
Esperançar por esse chão.
vamos cantar a vida de novo. Paulo Freire morre não. Vamos reaprender o Brasil,
Esperançar por esse chão.
vamos reencantar a nação,
Esperançar por esse chão.
vamos cantar a vida de novo. Paulo Freire morre não. O menino lê o mundo, olha o céu e risca o chão,
Risca o chão.
traça a linha do horizonte, silencia, vai à fonte, dança solto na amplidão. Brinca, canta, segue, vive, vai crescendo o homem livre sob o sol de Jaboatão. No Recife se fez mestre, em Angicos ele acende um farol que vai bem fundo, uma luz feita pro mundo de uma nova educação. Canta a bela melodia, traz a velha fantasia, rompe com qualquer prisão. Sua voz se faz canção, seu olhar abre horizontes, guarda a força da semente, vive o mestre em quem aprende, esperançar por esse chão. Vamos reaprender o Brasil,
Esperançar por esse chão.
vamos reencantar a nação,
Esperançar por esse chão.
vamos cantar a vida de novo. Paulo Freire morre não. Vamos reaprender o Brasil,
Esperançar por esse chão.
vamos reencantar a nação,
Esperançar por esse chão.
vamos cantar a vida de novo. Paulo Freire morre não. Vamos reaprender o Brasil,
Esperançar por esse chão.
vamos reencantar a nação,
Esperançar por esse chão.
vamos cantar a vida de novo. Paulo Freire morre não. Paulo Freire morre não. Paulo Freire morre não. Paulo Freire morre não.
Thank you very much, Walter, for sharing that. That was very
That was
nice.
great.
It's very beautiful. Thank you. And a final comment we have from Professor Audrey Dahl. She said, you three gave us so much energy to act on this world. We can contribute to make it better. Thank you so much. And that Professor Diane Pesco said it's a perfect ending. Well done. Thank you very much, Walter. Thank you, Inny. Thank you,
Thank you.
Eluza, so much. That was beautiful music, beautiful presentation, beautiful poem. That was amazing. Yeah, we couldn't be happier with such a beautiful panel today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Paulo Freire presente.
Paulo Freire presente.
Viva Paulo Freire.
Viva
Paulo Freire morre não.
Morre não.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Obrigado.
Thank you. Obrigada.
Obrigada, tchau.
So we are continuing at 2:45 in 10 minutes. We should have a workshop with Shay Hadley. The topic of the workshop is Where Now? Lessons from a Concordia Community LGBTQ2S Plus and Accessibility Initiative. So we hope to see you all there, and in 10 minutes we will be back. Thank you.
I'm a bit early, but I wish I had made more of that. That looked really beautiful.
That was nice, yeah. No worries, Shay, that's fine. We are live already, so
Yes.
you know, just so that you know. Do you need anything special before we start? And is everything okay?
No, we just have an ESL interpreter coming for this session.
Yes, let me just make sure that I bring that person in. Just Okay, so I checked everything, so everything is working. So YouTube is live, so everything is fine. So recording is happening. So thank you very much, Shay, for being here. It's a pleasure to have you for this workshop. That's amazing. So I will leave you to get the floor. So it's yours now. Let us know if you need anything. Noah is also here to help us. And yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. So just give me a second. Okay, welcome everybody. Again, thank you so much for having me here. My name is Shay Hadley, and I'm a master's student at Queen's University. However, I worked at Concordia for 2 years on a project called the Mapping Project, which is a queer, trans, and disability initiative that I'm gonna go into the findings a little bit, but this is also one part knowledge mobilization, and my mother is joining us as well. So just get here is. Oh, okay. Here we go. Yeah, so this is one part knowledge mobilization and also one part workshop. So I do have some questions more near the end for the participants, if you do feel like joining in on this sort of thought process and reflection on this project. Oops. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to start sort of with really kind of quick answers to the question where to now when we're talking about equity work. So there's a lot of this comes, of course, from other scholars. I'm going to link to some texts that are my favorites in the chat. And I'm thinking mostly on Sarah Ahmed and Zenia Galaza, who wrote a book called Trans in College. And so when we're thinking of kind of this sort of equity work, there really is no set destination. And we do need to move beyond this idea of a best practice, because a best practice sort of gives us this idea that we can come to a place that's best for everybody within the institution. And really what it is, it's ongoing development of better practices within the classroom ecosystem and within the institution itself that unsettles and disrupts oppression and power within the structure. I'm going to take some water. So this process really does require deep reflection on power that you have access to, as well as that you use within the institution, within education. So whiteness, settler colonial status, immigration status, disability, class, gender identity, and gender expression. And as well, we really do need to foster action sort of focused pedagogies that look at resistance, resilience, and valuing of other pedagogies outside of the canon. So I'm going to put these in the chat. I'm very bad at multitasking, so I'm actually going to do it later. Yeah, so the mapping project was housed at the Center for Gender Advocacy at Concordia. I know we're online now, but when we were not, it's a LGBTQ anti-racist feminist organizing space that has been mostly student run. And the project went from 2018 to 2020. And we really did work to follow community-based principles. And what I mean by that is we think of it more as kind of initiative than, well, it was a research project. It was guided by a community advisory committee and 3 really amazing RAs that we had on with us. And everybody had some form of connection to the population through our lived experiences and our identities. So yeah, so going back to the community-based kind of principles, we worked to be kind of guided by the advisory team, but it was a research project, but nobody really, nobody in the coordinating team, myself and the other coordinator, are researchers. So we've kind of, in that sense, yeah. Anyways, continuing on. So we did a content-based analysis that generated kind of themes, but we really looked more at description and details of events and like barriers, as well as student requests that queer, trans, and disabled students had at Concordia. Yeah, we did generate 2 very lengthy reports that I'm also going to link to you. So this is essentially, this is like who we heard from. We did a survey for students, which we got 252 student responses. We did 8 interviews and 2 focus groups. And the interviews and the focus groups were all queer, trans, and disabled students. We also did 2 surveys for professors, one on accessibility, which received 69 responses, and one on LGBTQ2S inclusion, for lack of a better word, which received 48 responses. And also one for staff at Concordia, so student-facing staff. When we received 93 responses for our accessibility survey and 70 for the LGBTQ survey. So it was a lot of data, which, yeah, for a 2-year project, it was a lot to work through, for sure. Yeah, and the student survey, just to look a little bit of who was in there, and there's more details in the reports. 61% identified as LGBTQ2S+, 33% of that population identified as trans, non-binary, or gender diverse. Again, like the reports go much more into detail of people's identities, and 4% identified as two-spirit, 50% identify as having a disability, 22% of the survey respondents are students of color, 70% of that population identified as LGBTQ2S, 42% as trans, non-binary, gender diverse, and 55% identified as having a disability. So, yeah, I'm gonna start just getting into a quote from one of the students that I think really best kind of represents some of the issues that they shared with us at Concordia, and I think in education in general. So I'm going to read it because it's long. So this is from Chicken Parmesan, and I will always, from now on, let people pick their own pseudonyms because we've got a lot of really great ones that you can read through in the report. And she says, where you're the only person that can talk about this issue, and I'll just continue, because you have literal experience with dealing with it. So sometimes you are that spokesperson, as shitty as it sounds, right? As shitty as it is. Maybe there's another problem there, or maybe many problems, depending on how you see it. I'm sometimes the only brown person in my class, right? So sometimes, like, if somebody is talking a whole bunch of bullshit, I'm just like, oh God, I need to say something. So this came up often, that students are put in a position of being sort of a spokesperson because issues that affect them directly are being misrepresented. And a lot of sort of the examples that we got, especially about racism within the classrooms, were where people are being presented in, like, cultures are being devalued, and just things that can really be corrected, I think, with more critical pedagogies, which I'm going to get into. So I'm contradicting myself a little bit. So even though there isn't, of course, I don't think that there is best practices, there are better practices that we can do. And these are questions that came out of the work directly from students. And so one of the main ones was on curriculum and meaningful representation, going back to Chicken Parmesan's, what she shared with us. So these are kind of questions that I want us to think about, and you don't have to answer these. I'm going to put them in the chat. Also, I know I've made like 3 put it in the chat promises already, but I will. I promise I will. So the first one is when you're thinking of curriculum development, and especially if you're presenting something that's not coming that isn't from your own community or from your own positionality. So is there like a way, and can it come from the community that it's about? So if you're presenting, I don't know, something on LGBTQ Black communities, can you present, do you have scholarship from LGBTQ Black scholars? And this is something that students really felt was missing in a lot of their classes. And even like classes that touch on these subjects, but this is like across disciplines. So also, how can it be more reflexive and reflective of critical approaches to the topics? So a lot of students in, say, psychology, as an example, of course, said that like LGBTQ populations, especially intersex people, are very much misrepresented, and that the canon that's being used devalues these identities in a lot of really harmful ways. And some of the professors on the survey did want to know how to adopt more critical approaches. And I'll talk about how that's not really supported in the institution, but there is this there is a desire there for sure to be more reflexive, but often professors don't feel like they have the tools to do that. Yeah, let's need another water break. Okay, so this is I feel like these are big questions, of course, right? That we can't really pick apart in a 45-minute presentation, but I would love for you to take these with you. So the other one is, does it other people when you're looking at curriculum outside of your positionality? So you're working to incorporate trans experiences and trans identities into, again, I'm not picking on psychology, but I'll use psychology again as an example, into psychology. Is it still reaffirming a gender binary that is shown in so much research to be very harmful to trans people, especially through psychological practices? Is it affirming that disabled bodies and people with disabilities need to be fixed? Is there a way that you can have more critical, reflexive approaches to this development of your curriculum? And also students very much brought forward who is teaching the course and what's their connection to the subject matter. A Two-Spirit student brought up in a survey response when we asked, do you see yourself essentially in curriculum? And they said yes, but only represented by white people. So continuing on this kind of line of reflection, we also need to look at how we're addressing these barriers students face through addressing internalized ableism and attitudinal barriers. This was like a large part of the findings, was that as much as it's structural, it's very much attitudinal, especially when we're talking about the experiences of students with disabilities. And you will notice that I flip between disabled student and student with disability. For those who don't know, there's a lot of people within disability communities that prefer disabled first versus a person first, which is sort of used within the institution, just to kind of revalue the idea of disability, and that being disabled is a natural and normal part of the world. Yeah. So just a little sideline there. You can tell that I keep diverging myself. So this is a very big question, but like, how do we show students with disabilities that higher education is better with them there, and that it's there for them? And it's not really just about how do we include students with disabilities, but how do we alter higher education because of the presence of disability? and that it's valued within the institution, that it's better with people with disabilities in it. And how do you do that in the classroom? How do you do that in the institution? So, and how, so like on the attitudinal and on the individual, a really big one was how do we respond to access requests? And that's pretty, that can be adjusted really easily for, I think, for professors. So things like, do you ask for details or do you just trust that the student knows what they need? So often students' autonomy was really questioned, and they reported a lot of like belittling attitudes, things like, I know the statistics around this kind of disability, and that's not an accessibility request. Or really like gatekeeping, like through sort of the medical system of, I don't trust that this is what you need, so I need you to have a doctor sort of prove it to me. Yeah, so that's, I think people can really adjust easily by just showing curiosity, and not in a way that's intrusive, but in a, okay, like you need an extension, so let's discuss this as like humans. And that was often kind of what people brought forward as what they really wanted. So what are ways also, when we're thinking of how we present information, what are ways to adjust our teaching methods to account for neurodivergence and the many ways that people learn and absorb knowledge? And I'm not talking just like a visual versus an auditory, like, yeah, because we really need to expand that idea in terms of knowing that we do know that everybody learns differently. And we really need to think of all of the ways that we adjust our material because of that. So yeah, this is kind of the same one, but what changes can we make to the structure of lectures and assignments that show an understanding and acceptance of shit happening? So it's, again, doesn't require medical gatekeeping. So it's, especially right now, I think this is really showing that like people in their, people in my online classes, they have their kids on their lap, their dog is coming up, and we're, this is okay in our world now, right? So I think that needs to be brought back in when we're having physical classrooms again, to this idea that even if it's not a global pandemic, a shit is always happening in people's lives, whether or not it has to do with disability. And that makes the environment so much better for everybody. I'm not used to not being able to get people's like affirmation. We're like, okay, we're good to move forward. I'll just look at you, Marlon. All right, so yeah, so things of course need to change at a university level, right? And at the institution level. And the text that I promised that I'll link to do talk more about these tensions than I'm gonna get into right now. But at Concordia, specifically, I guess that's where the study was done, there is a lack of an accessibility commitment. So unlike other universities, and of course this is a province by province sort of problem, because Ontario, for an example, has the AODA, which guides the universities to have like 5-year accessibility plans. Quebec does not have that. But at the same time, in one of our reports, which is a review of the 16-year-old accessibility policy that provides recommendations, we do suggest that universities adapt and change without provincial sort of reinforcement, because that takes a very long time. And we know change within the institution is like a turtle. So yeah, so there is definitely a lack of commitment. So some examples is the Women's Studies building. Again, we're like, what's a building? But when we did access buildings, yeah, the Women's Studies building has been trying to move for many years. SCPA is up a flight of stairs. There is no wheelchair access or mobility aid access to either of these buildings. And we know through this project, as well as just years of just conversations with students with disabilities at Concordia, that people do change their programs because of this, and people do decide on a career path or a different sort of faculty to go into because of inaccessibility. Physical access is a big issue on that campus for sure. As well as, you know, policies only go so far, but they do guide an institution. And the policy on accessibility at Concordia is 16 years old. And a lot has changed in the landscape of disability at over 16 years, right? Our language has changed. Our conversations around neurodivergence have changed. Wording around inclusion has changed. There's so much more now to look at that needs to be incorporated into a policy that people are going to use to guide their practices. And one of the main things that's really missing from the accessibility policy at Concordia that was recommended in our report is accountability measures. So one of the universities that we looked at that's in Ontario really nicely showed all of the accountability that's within the institution. I don't know how it's used, but it's there. So it shows the professor responsibility. It shows the administrative responsibility for accessibility, staff responsibility. And what this does is it guides people so that they know what their roles are. Because often what we do here, of course, and I'm sure what people do feel and experience is that there's such a culture of overwork within the university. So asking a professor to adjust or to learn a new pedagogy often feels very challenging because it is challenging. And so if the institution does have a policy that says, well, this is what you need to do to help with accessibility, yes, there are definitely issues with that, which I'm not gonna go into too much detail because I want to hear from whoever's here, but yeah, it does help because it gives people somewhere to look for guidance. So many services like Berks and health services were kind of like mentioned, especially by trans students, is improving immensely over the years, or like within the last like year and a half to 2 years. I guess 2020 doesn't really count, so that's the year before, yeah. In being accessible and welcoming to trans students. So doing like small things like asking for people's pronouns, it does really make a big difference. It's not the only thing, but that's one thing that like health services, for an example, has been working on implementing and ensuring that like just like changing immediately, like if a student's like, that's not the name I use, they're just like, okay, sorry. And they move on, they change it, and they don't make the mistake again. Or if they do, they apologize and it's updated. So it's that kind of sort of like ease of adaptation that students really want to see. There is a major lack of training that staff did like indicate, and they want more, they want to know, they want to be updated on, especially say at health services. There's the landscape of like trans health is always changing. So there needs to be a constant sort of like opportunity for staff to receive training. So, my parents are napping in the background. So it's my melodic voice. So, or the topic material. So, so prior to COVID, so gender neutral washrooms have been locked on campus, and they did give like a key card access, but it often didn't work. So most students sort of reported that like they couldn't access a gender neutral washroom, right? And there's a story in the report from a student where he had to go and he had to request a key from security, and security followed him to the washroom, waited, and then left. And this is a really like disturbing and like oppressive experience for a student to have to go request to pee or, you know, request to use the washroom and then be followed by security. So this is kind of a policy that took place without like people that use these washrooms. And the washrooms also work as accessible washrooms. So there's of course problems there too in terms of like who gets priority, right? And yeah, so this is like a policy that happened without any consultation of the people that use the washrooms. And then of course there's these unseen consequences, right? So these things really need to be sort of like pulled apart within the institution. You need to think of, if we're going to lock the washrooms, say for security reasons, like who's using these washrooms, and then what's the steps that are going to happen that like disrupt their ability to access them. Yeah, and there's no unified onboarding practices, and maybe this has changed since this project, but that teaches sort of better practices to professors. And like going back kind of to the washroom example, the institutional equity work that was recently done did not reflect requests from LGBTQ2S+ and disabled students, nor their realities. And an example of that, yeah, so at the time, the equity focused like reports that were released from Concordia kind of in the middle of our project, they didn't reflect the calls of action as an example of having a Black Studies program that have been happening since the 1960s, or addressing racism on campus. Also did not talk about the realities of, like I said, queer and trans and disabled students. So an example is a part in the report says that the presence of gender neutral washrooms emphasized equity on campus, emphasized that, to quote, EDI work was being done on campus, which is interesting for us because when we asked a group of trans students, like, what is the one thing that you need Concordia to change right now? The answer was bathrooms. Like, we need access to bathrooms. So there's this tension, and Sarah Ahmed really beautifully talks about this, where the equity work sort of dismisses the oppressions that are really happening on campus. Because if you can say, well, you know, EDI is reflected through this, then it's like going back to like, well, we've achieved that best practice, right? But then, of course, then students are saying something else, and that's really what needs to be listened to. And LGBTQ students and Two-Spirit students aren't anywhere in the report. Neither are staff or faculty, which is very interesting to me. And I'm not saying that these reports aren't useful by any means, but if you're doing institutionalized equity and you're leaving out LGBTQ2S people, I mean, that process needs to be looked at, right? And this then by default misses all of the intersections of experience that equity work really needs to be focused on. So the experiences of Black and trans students on campus, the experiences of disabled trans students on campuses. How's my time? I can't see anything. I always talk slower than I think I do.
That's okay, not a problem. Let me just check that for you myself as well here. So it's 3:12 for me, and you have until 3:25. So we still have a few minutes. That's okay.
Wonderful. Okay. So some of what we got from students is from students with disabilities is 42% of them have dropped out of a class due to inaccessibility. And kind of, going back to what I was talking a little bit about, like bodily autonomy and just like trusting students' needs. This is like one of my favorite quotes that of course now I can't see. Here we go. Okay. From Pufferfish. Loving these pseudonyms. So we were talking kind of about like what is it that you need in the classroom environment? And we sort of stumbled into a conversation about like leniency, or this idea of like adaption. And they said, leniency as in you're all humans and you all have bodies, you all have lives, you can do what makes sense in your life, and doesn't need to be sitting here for straight through whether we have a break or not, which a lot of classes don't, or not in this particular 3-hour class. And trusting that students are just, you know, not being disrespectful or not caring about the subject matter or something like this, when it's actually understood as students being students to the best of their ability. So yeah, I really love that, because it really just showcases that students really just want a welcoming and respectful environment that understands them as like another human in the ethos of the university. That, like, again, like I said, like that shit happens, and like, yeah, you might need to go and leave your classroom to take a call because there's something going on with your child. And that's not going to be interpreted as you disrespecting the space, right? Yeah, so I would love to hear from you, if you feel up for it, on how you think this kind of environment of like what I just talked about around this idea of like leniency, though that was, you could tell that that wasn't really what we were talking about, because they said like leniency as in, you know, so like more like adaption and evolving. How can this be better fostered in the university? And people are welcome to either come on video and audio, I believe that's possible, or just put it in the chat if you feel like it. I have to figure out how to access the chat.
Yeah, so whoever would like to write, just write in the chat. I think we're able to see it. And we can also allow you to speak. You can only use your voice, or if you want to be on video as well. You can raise your hand and I will turn it on for you. So there is, so this is not a question. So Yamanda has just said something.
Great.
Would you like to go through it? Shay, I think. Can I read it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's start with Amanda then. So Amanda said, this is not a question, but a message to Concordia students. So DOICSA, which is the Department of Education Interdisciplinary Graduate Students Association, is currently trying to gather information about students' needs and experiences around equity, diversity, and inclusion in the department. If you are a Concordia education student interested in these topics, please contribute by completing this short anonymous survey. So she added the link as well to be completed. It's anonymous as well. So that's interesting, the connection. Yeah,
absolutely. There's a lot of departments, like the university really works in silos, and there's a lot of departments that are doing their own equity initiatives. And that's wonderful. Thank you, Amanda, for your work. I'd be happy to talk to you at any point, because we definitely spoke to a decent amount of education students. Yeah.
Perfect. Milo has also commented flexibility from profs, additional support for profs to be able to be flexible. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. That's like that was like one of our main sort of findings is I find that kind of within these conversations, there's always sort of that tension, especially with professors. And I understand where it comes from, and it's definitely like fear-based, where they'll, you know, what was I trying to say? Yeah, there's this tension of kind of like, well, students are making too many requests. You know, it's I can't like adjust constantly to these like new descriptors, these new identities, it's too much, I can't do it. But really what students, and it kind of breaks my heart a little bit, but because really like what students need is flexibility, and they need, like I said, the understanding of shit happening, the understanding of like different bodies and minds within the institution. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got a comment here now. So let me see if I can. So bear with me for 1 second. It's Amanda. So Amanda, I'll put Amanda in so that she can speak.
Great. Hi, Amanda.
Hi. So yeah, I just posted the link to the survey, but I'll just follow up by saying that the Concordia Department of Education recently convened a new EDI committee, and they solicited student participation, and it felt like we were trying to reinvent the wheel and kind of I don't know. I think people are willing and motivated, but don't necessarily know what to do, and there's not a lot of guidance. So when I saw your presentation listed in the survey or in the schedule for the symposium, I was so excited. And I'm sure, I mean, we can't see the audience, but I'm sure there are other people and probably some faculty from this committee who are attending for that reason. And we also, another faculty member, when I shared the link to your presentation, went out and found the PDFs that you were talking about. So like we looked through those, and they were so helpful, in my opinion, much more helpful than the documents that have been produced by the university. And so I just want to say thank you for the work you're doing. It is trickling down, I hope, and I'm very appreciative.
Oh, thank you. That's really sweet. And yeah, it's hard work. And I'm gonna, I keep saying that I'm like afraid to exit my presentation, so to like post my links, but the books that I recommend, so I'm just gonna vocalize it. And I imagine that if you're doing this kind of work, you already know about Sarah Ahmed's work. And these, again, like these are a little bit more theoretical, it's a bit more dense, but they helped me a lot. So On Being Included by Sarah Ahmed is an amazing book on equity work within the university, and those kind of like what she calls like the brick walls that you face within the institution. And definitely academic ableism is really wonderful too, but there's probably less like heady text that I can recommend that maybe help guide the practice a little bit. But I do hear you on yeah, the difficulty of the work and feeling like there isn't guidance and feeling alone in it for sure. And yeah, just know that like it does help while we can be critical of the way equity is done within the institution. It does help students. And I know a lot, personally, I know a lot of education students that would probably have had a better time in the faculty for the work that you're doing. Yeah. I don't know if I answered any questions, but I'm here. I'm here.
That's great, Shay. Sarah Kennedy, who is the chair in the department, she just acknowledged what Amanda said. She said, yes, Amanda brought me here.
Oh, great. Thanks for being here. And I'm happy that the reports, it was like, it was definitely difficult because like I said at the beginning, we didn't have a strong research background, but we did have an amazing advisory committee with 2 professors on it who helped us a lot immensely. And then we had a professor in the sexuality department in KT kind of review our reports at the end and help us better look at like how we were talking about the issues. Yeah, the report wasn't really disseminated that well because we ran out of resources. So our knowledge mobilization sort of stopped, unfortunately. But that's a good question. Yeah.
Professor Kennedy would like to speak as well.
Yeah, please. Come on in.
Sorry, is it me, Marlon?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
go ahead.
sorry. Hi, I'm Sarah Kennedy. I'm the chair of the Department of Education. And yes, I'd like to thank Amanda Dunbar for letting us know that this workshop was happening. I just want to speak to the point that Amanda made that it seems like we're reinventing the wheel. We have a fairly new dean of arts and science, and although there is a faculty EDI committee that is being formed, or group from the different departments, she does not, her name is Pascale Sicotte, she does not want to dictate how each department's EDI committee works. She said that explicitly to me. So she would rather it be kind of organic, based on the concerns of the people in the department. And so it may seem a bit formless at the beginning. I don't think it's meant to, but certainly it's not structured in a top-down way. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's good information. Yeah, so maybe it's the non-hierarchy sometimes can be a bit difficult for people to navigate. Like the center is a non-hierarchical environment. So, but when we need direction, it can be challenging when we were there for sure. I'm just going to add something, but I completely forgot what it was. But thank you for that. Yeah, I believe I know I'm running out of time. I can feel it. I think I have a few more things to touch on. I'll just see if I can get to them. But thank you so much for participating and like adding to this conversation. Yeah, so kind of in summary, and we know that this is like a lot of vagueness, and for those that are doing actual equity work in the institution, that could be frustrating, right? Because here I am saying like there's no best practice you can implement, right? But I think that expansion of thought really helps us create better practices, because it really is in making mistakes that we learn to undo these harmful behaviors and institutional practices. The tension I think that I didn't talk about but got to, or no, I did a little bit, yeah. We didn't really see that in our work of like students being like, I want everything to be abolished immediately and like reinvented. And yeah, sure, there's definitely that has to be done in a lot of ways for sure, for this work to actually like blossom. But really what in our work students really wanted was care and like warmth from their professors. I wish that I had made it to the last panel, because I know his work is very much about that, right? In adopting a critical pedagogy. And yeah, so especially when they make like requests like things like, you messed up my pronoun, like not to have that defensiveness come up, instead to just be met with that, again, like you're a human and like you have this need and that's great. And yeah, I'm sorry. And I'm gonna make that correction. And it is usually fairly that easy, to be honest. Yeah, or addressing racism in the class, that happens. Just not acknowledging it allows it to be considered okay. And this is the same about ableism. This is the same about, any form of oppression within the institution. So how people do that, of course, is like a learning process, but that is sort of where we need to start, is by visibilizing these things as not all right in our classrooms. And yeah, to show flexibility in pedagogical approaches, I think, like I said, and really a revaluing, and a lot of decolonial scholarship talks about this, is we're revaluing what was devalued in the institution, right? So how can you use like a trans pedagogy in psychology, right? And like, how does that inform your approaches? Yeah, so the university, like when we were talking again about the institutionalized practices of equity, it really needs to be more transparent. And there is a fear for sure, I think, within the institution of admitting that there's inequity in the institution, and that really needs to be worked through, whether that's on an administrative level or systemic level or trickled up from activism. Yeah, and there has to be an accountability within its equity practices to set up professors to replicate the processes of their colleagues, because there are professors doing really great work within the institution. But again, because we work in silos, we don't see that work, right? But yeah, so I just wanted to see if there was any last questions, and then I know that I need to wrap up. So.
I think Amanda, would you like to say something?
No, this time it's not me.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I just realized my hand was still up from before. I apologize.
Sorry, I muted. So what were some of the recommendations from this research?
Yeah, this is a very good question. So like kind of like the basis of like what I talked about earlier, just about flexibility, bringing care and like warmth into like responding to requests, like, but then we have a list of like 15 recommendations in the reports. So I'm gonna just take a second to link to them out of fear of, doing this, which I just did. So 1 second. So first, these are just copy and paste this into something. These are all the texts I recommended because I can't help myself. I'm just gonna stop sharing. Totally, of course I have it up already, okay. All right, so this is where you can access the reports, and I know that a few of you have found them already, and thank you so much. I'm really happy that they're being used and are helpful in some capacity, because like I said, we certainly ran out of energy. Oh, I already linked it, there we go. And resources to really do proper knowledge mobilization, so it's great that they're being utilized. But yeah, just to like name off a few of the recommendations, again, like there's like so many like throughout the report, but really a lot of them were rooted in listening to students. Yeah, just like it's kind of as simple as that. And things like developing onboarding packages and processes were really important, especially for professors, because they just want like a guiding post, kind of like what I think Amanda said about not feeling like having that sort of some form of baseline of where to start, right? Yeah, so that as well as more training. And there is definitely a tension around like whether or not training, like going back to that idea of if it's, performative or not within the institution. Sometimes training doesn't really do anything, but at least it's there for people to have an opportunity to like learn and be guided a little bit, because it's a lot to do this work by yourself for sure. Yeah, so training, mandatory training, especially around like things like pronouns and trans realities and two-spirit identities and experiences, how to sort of incorporate Indigenous like methodologies and more critical discourse around colonialism into the classrooms. Yeah, and one student made a really great request of having a committee that reviews curriculum by department. So that does have students on it, as well as just putting more money into things, putting more money into student-based activism and equity work. Of course, I forgot to mention that the money is important. The project came from the Concordia Student Union, which allowed us to extend it, which we needed to. And also from the first funder was the CCSL, which is the Concordia, I always mess this up, committee, student life. I'm so sorry. If they're watching, I apologize. Yeah, but we appreciate the money to do this work. Yeah, but we really just need to revalue student voice and experience. Yeah. I think we're at time.
That's perfect, Shay. That was amazing. Thank you so much for being here for us and for bringing us, all this information and also call for action. That's amazing. I think we really, got a lot of thinking, and also you have also, helped us understand how we could definitely put those things in action, that they're doable, they're possible. That's not the end of the world. So it's amazing that you brought us some very amazing and engaging presentation today.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, and good luck with your studies as well. Good luck with everything.
Yeah,
I'm really I would look forward to reading more about this, as you go.
The pressure is on. Thanks so much.
Thank you. That's amazing. Yeah. So we are going to have our final keynote speaker in a few minutes. That's going to be at 3:45. So we will be back in a few minutes. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Thank you.
Hello again, team.
Hi, Naveen. Hi, Tiffany. So we are waiting for the participants. We should start in a few minutes.
Thank you, Marlon.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. I was just like realizing that in one of my interactions with Susan, I wrote 4:45, right, Susan? And that's what I'm realizing now. And I said, oh, but I'm glad that that you you looked at the schedule, and thank you very much for being here. You know, it's great. It has been a wonderful symposium, a wonderful conversation, great paper presentation so far. So it's been amazing. Yes. So I will. I think it's Niveen would like to start.
Yeah, thank you, Marlon. Good evening, all, and thank you for this great day. So at the end of our day, I would, on behalf of the GSDE co-chairs and the GSDE committee and everyone at the educational faculty at Concordia, I want to thank you all for your insightful presentations and valuable contribution. Thank you all for all who attended, presented, participated, held, and supported to make this symposium a great success. Thanks for all your help in hosting our first virtual symposium for this year. Without our staff volunteers and our co-chairs, the GSDE would never have been able to pull off such a great event for our students at Concordia and other students in other universities around Canada. The symposium was made possible through the generous support of the sponsors. So we thank our sponsors for helping make the event a success. Thanks for all of the keynote speakers, poster presenters, workshop presenters, and panelists for the time and effort you took to share your thoughts, beliefs, hopes, and fears and experiences. We hope that you all learned something new about our increasingly complex issues that we all face nowadays in our world and made some fruitful connections throughout the day. We hope that you will want to be involved in our symposium next year. And once again, our sincere thanks and gratitude to you all one by one. We could not have pulled this off without you all. Stay safe and stay well and connected until we meet again, with our warmest regards and love. And now we go to our lovely keynote speaker, Susan.
Just one more thing before I apologize. It's we would like as well before Susan starts to announce that next year we will have our graduate symposium 2022. And I'm very happy and glad to announce that Antonia Macris, who is a student in the Department of Education, will be chairing and forming a committee. So if you're interested, in joining the committee, please reach out for Antonia. She has a wonderful experience. She has been a great asset during the organization of the symposium as well. So thank you very much, Antonia. Thank you very much for your help during this organization this year. And good luck for next year as well. And we are here, if you need anything. And would you like to say anything?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marlon, for that. I just wanted to start by saying it's been a privilege working on this year's organizing committee this past year in preparation of today's symposium. And I would like to extend a big congratulations to the co-chairs, to Marlon, Tiffany, and Naveen, who have led a great effort to today's successful events. I thank everyone on the team for your continuous dedication, your hard work, your passion for supporting students in the field of education. I believe we were able to showcase and highlight the best work of so many scholars today from institutions across the globe. So it's truly been a rewarding journey. So thank you for that. And I'm also very honored to be taking lead as chair next year for GSDE 2022 and the organizing committee. So I look forward to leading the next team and toward another successful GSDE. So thank you all so much again for coming. And if anyone wants to reach out and volunteer, feel free. And we hope to see you back again next year. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Antonia. I really look forward to next year's symposium for 2022. I think it's going to be amazing with you as the co-chair. Thank you so much. I just want to introduce Susan BRIGHAM. She is a PhD and is a full-time professor in the Faculty of Education at the Mount St. Vincent University. She teaches in the Graduate Studies of Lifelong Learning program and the Inter-University Doctoral Program in Educational Studies. Susan's research interests include adult and higher education, immigration, diversity, and gender. Susan has conducted research and presented her work in North America, the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, and Europe. She is currently conducting research related to refugee youth and immigrant families, and is conducting a project examining culture and perspectives on university sexual assault policies. Thank you so much for being here, Susan, and I give you the floor.
Thank you so much. This is fantastic, and what a lot of positive, lovely energy I'm feeling here right now. So, and congratulations again, as folks have already said, on the amazing organization of this conference. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm hoping that it works out. And then you can always tell me if it doesn't seem to show up as it should. I'm wondering if you can let me know if you can see it right now.
Yes, Susan.
Oh,
Everything's good.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. So yes, I wanted to thank you again for inviting me to be your keynote speaker this afternoon. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you today, and I appreciate you staying right to the very end. And even though you may be feeling quite a bit zoomed out, that you're here at this hour is, I guess that says something about the conference organizers and how they've done such a fantastic job of keeping you engaged and stimulated. I want to thank too the ASL interpreter who's working very hard. And I noticed this ASL interpreter was here this morning when I was tuning into the morning keynote. So just awesome work you're doing. Thank you. So I am joining you from Shabukduk, which is otherwise known as Halifax in Nova Scotia. And it is situated on Mi'kma'ki, which is the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And it's governed by the Peace and Friendship Treaties. There's a series of them from 1725 to 1779. And so I would pay respect to the knowledge of the Mi'kmaq and of the elders past and present. So to get started, I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit different. I'm going to ask you to, if you feel comfortable, just close your eyes, if you feel safe to do so. And I need you to take a deep breath through your nose and release it through your nose. And do that again. Just deeply breathe through your nose and release it. And just one more time, and hold the breath at the top just for a second or two. Breathe in and hold, and then release. Now just breathe normally and be aware of your thoughts, and keep your eyes closed if you like. And soften that space between your eyebrows. Relax your jaw, rest your tongue. Slightly separate your upper and your lower teeth. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Straighten your back and breathe. If possible, let any concerns or negative thoughts go from your mind. Declutter your mind by letting these thoughts pass through, but don't dwell on any of those thoughts. Just breathe at your own pace. And think of someone or something that you love dearly and that gives you a sense of peace and gratitude. And in your mind, do you wish that person or that animal or that thing well? Feel gratitude. Okay, and now you can open your eyes. And thank you for giving yourself that time to just kind of subtle, maybe declutter the brain just a little bit. And imagine now that we're sitting in a circle, because I know if we were in face-to-face situation, we probably would be situated together in some sort of community practice. And this is perhaps what we could be looking like if we were in a face-to-face situation. Now, the title of my talk today is called To Think, to Dream, to Touch the Sky, Adult Education as a Practice of Freedom. And that title was really inspired by Maya Angelou's poem, who some of you may be familiar with, called The Caged Bird. And the first part of the poem goes like this. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. So imagine yourself as that free bird, as a student, as an educator. Imagine the freedom to leap, to float, to dip your wings, and to dare to claim or touch the sky. Now, not everyone has that freedom. There are folks who cannot be who they wish to be. They can't spread their wings and soar or pursue their dreams at the moment. So I want to acknowledge those various constraints. And some of us have more constraints than others in our effort to practice our freedom. So that's what I'll be talking about today, is I'll be talking about this idea of freedom in connection with education and in connection with some of my current research, as well as some theories that I have found very helpful to me. And so firstly, a little bit about me. I'm an adult educator, and I work with and in community as a practitioner, as a co-researcher, and as a mentor with various organizations and community groups. And I also, as you heard in the introduction, I am a professor in a higher education institution, and I'm a researcher. So in both of these contexts, in community and in higher education, my work is a form of activism with the aim for social justice, and it's informed by critical theories such as Black feminist theory, critical race theory, and Afrocentricity. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the insights from Afrocentricity today. And I'm also going to connect it with something that I've recently got to know a bit more about, which is meditative inquiry. And I got to know about that theory from my colleague, Ashwani Kumar. And Ashwani laments that the world is in a state of crisis. Our ecology, the foundation of life on planet Earth, is in danger. Peace on Earth is also denied because of antagonistic, nationalistic, religious, ideological, racial, and economic groups. And I share his concerns wholeheartedly. The world crisis is very complex. And so for the purpose of this conversation, I'm going to zero in on racial conflict as one of those crises that we are facing. So as a person of African descent, an experienced school teacher in different parts of the world, and currently as a professor, there's no other, incidentally, I teach at Mount St. Vincent, and there is no other professor of African descent in our faculty. And most of our student body, the domestic student body, are white. And so race is often on my mind. And with the recent rise of the Black Lives Matter movement and the killing of George Floyd in 2020 and other African Americans before and since, and plus the historic and ongoing racial injustice and anti-Black racism in Canada and elsewhere, coupled with that knowledge that racism is not a new phenomena, I declare that we cannot continue as we are. Whatever we're doing in universities, in schools, in the justice system, in policing, in housing, and healthcare, is not resulting in a more just society for Black folks and others. So as a society, we have to be open to different ways of thinking, and we must be willing to try something new. So the fourth stanza, the third line, the third section of the poem by Maya Angelou goes like this. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with the fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. And so that poem and the anguish in that bird's face there, it's a reminder too, again, of the way that folks are living their lives in sort of a captive mode. The captivity is based on racial oppression and other intersecting types of oppressions. So making no assumptions here about a definition of adult education, I'm just going to talk about my definition. And I would say that adult education is the development and enactment of knowledges and practices that make a difference to individuals, social groups, communities, and or society at large. Adult education can have a range of social, cultural, political, and economic purposes and implications. And so we can look at adult education perhaps through these three paradigms that you may be familiar with from Jürgen Habermas. And he talks about the first paradigm, which is the technical, and it's influenced by the traditional scientific experts who held the idea of predicting and exerting control over the environment through very efficient means. And within that paradigm, the educator's role then is to transfer skills. The humanist paradigm is the second one, and it assumes that humans are community-oriented and that the learners are autonomous and they want to reach their full potential. And the values of honesty, fairness, and dignity are very prevalent in that paradigm. And the third one is the critical paradigm, in which critical thinking, critical reflection, and critical awareness are valued. The goals of critical paradigm are to uncover knowledge from ideology, to develop creativity and criticality in the learner, and to take transformative action. In this paradigm, the learner is viewed as free to engage in society and communicate with others without the sway of power. So if you look at what we do in adult education across the country, we could see aspects of all three of these paradigms. And so I would suggest that the Afrocentric adult education approach fits within the critical. And I suggest that it's a philosophy that centers peoples of African descent in any analysis. And it provides a critical lens to address the general deletion of Black experiences and histories from curriculum. And it disrupts the authority of the dominant Eurocentric narrative. It legitimizes Black knowledge producers, and it brings into focus racial disparities, and it challenges anti-Black racism. And I want to say that having been at your conference in the morning, you began with a keynote speaker, which I thought was very reflective of an Afrocentric approach. She shared her story as a Black woman. She, her story was centered, and the learning that we gained through her storytelling is a very Afrocentric way of learning. When we're hearing and we're engaging in that first person perspective and hearing her lived experience as a rich opportunity for deep learning. So yeah, kudos to the first keynote speaker, whose name is escaping me now, but very much enjoyed her talk this morning. So often in classrooms and in courses, we're often asked to engage with critical or with more white perspectives. We're often reading white male perspectives. And as students, we're often asked to take on their arguments, to relate to their narratives, their theories, their accomplishments, their art, and their histories, at the detriment of other perspectives. Sometimes those other perspectives are added on perhaps around the edge of this so-called boss curriculum. And so this is not to dismiss the work, the valuable work that white men have contributed. It's only to say that there are other perspectives that must also be included and considered. So the purpose of Afrocentric adult education is to provide an educational environment in which African Canadian learners are not culturally oppressed in their sense of being. So it acknowledges a collective responsibility to actively reclaim our cultural heritage and our epistemic centers. An Afrocentric critical framework requires a paradigm shift that embraces different ways of knowing. And it reflects on what George Day, as some of you will be very familiar with George Sefa Day, who's at York University. And he talks about these 4 discursive stances that I wanted to point out here. He says the 4 stances that we need to take are decolonization, which is a political and intellectual act that requires we ask new questions. Anti-colonial is intimately connected to that decolonization. And the third one is there's a particular place of indigenous epistemologies to challenge and replace and reimagine alternatives to colonial thinking. And the 4th one is the power of sanctity and activity, and the creation of sacred learning spaces and landscapes. His PowerPoint slides that he used for this discussion on the discursive stances is available online through I have it up here, the link, the dbdli.ca link. So he elaborates on these discursive stances, but they are, I think, very relevant to what I'm talking about today. And it supports also this concept of Sankofa. Some of you may be familiar with this Afrocentric concept. The concept of Sankofa is an Asante Adinkra symbol, and it depicts a bird moving forward with her head turned backward, and she's holding an egg in her mouth. And it serves as a reminder that the knowledge of the past must never be forgotten, and that in order to move ahead, we need to retrieve the wisdom of the past to help our future generations. So this concept of Sankofa is about the necessity of reclaiming African indigenous knowledge. So looking back at the cumulative practices of African people, we need to be able to be willing to listen and learn from our elders and reclaim that subjugated knowledge. Afrocentric education really envisages a fair and more democratic world. So in addition to criticality, it's about the integration of the mind, the body, and the spirit, and the stimulation of critical consciousness, and the embracing of spirituality. The other important concept in Afrocentricity is Ubuntu, which some of you may be familiar with. And Ubuntu is an axiom that says, I am because you are. And it implicates an appreciation of the interconnectedness of our relationships between people and with our past and with the present. And epistemologically, Afrocentricity is about relationality. And ontologically, it is also about relationality. Relationships are central. And in terms of values or axiology, it's based on relational accountability and respect. If I'm going too fast, just let me know. Okay. So recognizing that in adult education, forms of knowledge have often been monopolized for the few at the expense of many. The hegemony of whiteness and colonialism, which have firm footholds in Canada's education system, are blockages contributing to this persistent resistance, limiting our transformation in education. And my hope is that the more people get to know and understand other ways of knowing, such as meditative inquiry, Afrocentricity, or other Indigenous ways, the more perhaps we can see change and see a transformation in the way that we teach and learn and live and be. And so this dependence on various factors, such as these folks are, often, as I mentioned, in my university, most of the faculty are white. And so I think, the more we can open up our teaching force, as we can open up just as we have with our student body, I think there's more possibility for bringing in different ways of knowing and being and engaging our colleagues, no matter what their backgrounds are, in different ways of knowing and being. So this importance of decluttering our minds and learning to live with one's whole being is a very important part of Afrocentricity. So to be Afrocentric requires one to get out from under that damaging weight of anti-Black racism and the exclusionary colonial Eurocentric norms. So like meditative inquiry, Afrocentricity requires a holistic and existential deep seeing of our inner consciousness. And so for some of us, this may involve silence. As the Swahili proverb says, silence produces peace and peace produces safety. And it could also mean embracing embodied practices and symbolic practices, such as singing, dancing, poetry, libations, folk tales, proverbs, cultural stories, chants, prayers, dreams, visions, and art. And embodied learning is vital, as Rodriguez states, that for all of us, Black and post-colonial and otherwise, the body represents ancestry and speaks to various processes of history. And thus, when we have to submit to ways of articulating ourselves that demand we leave our bodies out of the equation, we have profound problems. So when these types of activities have not been included in your courses, we need to ask why. And if your course outline that you have received from your professor or that you have created yourselves is pretty much just the same as it was 5 years ago or even 10 years ago, we need to ask why. If the professors who are teaching in your universities are predominantly white, we have to ask why. And if who you're being asked to read and relate to in the course outline, if they are predominantly white, we have to ask why. What is being privileged and what is being left out? Through Afrocentric spirituality, individuals come to know a more holistic concept of themselves, free from the constrictions of previously unexamined, assimilated assumptions about themselves, their potential, their capabilities, their characteristics, and that of their families and their communities. And this is closely connected with the idea of meditative inquiry, which considers studying how one has been conditioned by political, economic, educational, and religious influences that are central to a holistic educational experience. And Kumar says, this inquiry into one's conditioning, which influences one's whole being, is the beginning of intelligence and creativity. So one thing that I often talk about in relation to Afrocentricity is spirituality. And I can define it as a self-definition, a self-knowledge, and the key to transformation. It centers us in us. And as I mentioned, I am because you are, which is the Ubuntu adage. The individual and the community are indistinguishable. So through collective consciousness, the power of the spirit, we can reclaim ourselves and our souls. We can reclaim our spirituality to help us resist colonial and intellectual domination. So drawing on the work of one of my doctoral students, Kesa Monroe Anderson, she says spirituality is interpersonal connections between individuals and community, and it is crucial to self-definition, self-knowledge, and it's the key to transformation. And she mentions that spirituality is central to everyday life, and it can help us to predominantly problematize the predominantly Eurocentric values, such as individualism, independence, competition, and control that influences the way we think and how we teach and learn. So critiquing these influences of education can help us to negate the oppressive Eurocentric values that are taking place across the world. And the value of going inward to study our own consciousness at the same time as going outward and being attentive to relationships in schools and universities and elsewhere. It's part of our spiritual development, and it's an important connection between Afrocentricity and meditative inquiry. And as I noted, Afrocentricity is relational. Relationships with others, with our ancestors, and with nature are central to indigenous perspectives, and yet they are often ignored in our education. That nature provides us sustenance to our minds and bodies and spirits is not a new idea. Learning from the land and from other species has been and will continue to be critical for our survival. Learning that requires careful observation and listening to nature and acknowledging the plants and the grass and the trees and the fish and birds, wind and rivers, they are our teachers. And you may have heard of this quote from, it's been attributed to Chief Seattle, but he says, "Every part of this earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every meadow, every humming insect, all are whole in the memory and experience of my people. We know the sap that courses through the trees as well as we know the blood that courses through our veins. We are part of the earth and it is part of us." So certainly one of the lessons we can observe from nature is the inevitability of change, something that as humans we fight against and we face with fear and disdain. But ancient wisdoms come from that time that was not ruled by capitalism, and a time that wasn't revolving around this idea that time is money. And so this is not to say that the past was simpler, but that understanding ways of being, relating, and knowing that's not contaminated with the ideologies that we have today, it can be very helpful for us. So I'm coming to the conclusion of my talk so that we can have some time for questions, but I just wanted to reiterate a few things. So to me, Afrocentric spirituality and meditative inquiry, they coalesce around this important idea of the human consciousness and the importance of our relationship with people and nature and with ideas. So how could these ideas play out in adult education or at universities? How can we be connected to this idea of deep seeing, of nurturing this inner consciousness? So I mentioned about the solitude and making space for yourself in your assignments, in your teaching practices, and even in your learning practices. So finding time to critically reflect, maybe to practice meditation, journal, do those types of critical reflections are very important, particularly if you are like the first keynote speaker in the morning. She talked about how she was required to, go at 8 o'clock. She worked straight through till 3 o'clock attending courses, and she went to work and she came home and she studied until 4 in the morning, and then she went to bed for 3 hours and did it all over again. And to me, that type of learning is very problematic, as she pointed out. It was very unhealthy for her mentally, and I would say intellectually, it's difficult to entertain new ideas if you are exhausted. So depending on the context and where you are learning, whether it's at university or elsewhere, I think we should be asking for opportunities to work and engage in cooperation, companionship, compassion, communion, and communicate as openly and authentically as we can. And I would add also courage is another important part of what we need to do as learners and as educators. So this, when we get together intentionally, like we are right here in a conference, and when you get together intentionally as a student in a course, that's an incredible opportunity for developing a sense of community of learners who can care about and support one another. And where possible, shared food or refreshments are often an important part of learning, and the time and the care that is required to get to know each other and feel a part of a community, that's an important part. And it often happens, at a conference, for example. If we didn't have a pandemic, you probably would be gathering around the coffee and the donuts and, having these informal conversations, and they're so important for a sense of community. And this involves helping students feel safe with each other and their experiences, and feeling heard and acknowledged, and being challenged by different ideas and theories. And so an activity I often include in my first class is we talk about the assumptions about how we're going to interact in the classroom. And we agree on how we will, proceed to interact with one another. And that list can change as we go through. And we acknowledge that racism is something that's learned, but it's something that we need to challenge, that sexism is a learned behavior, a learned attitude, a learned act, and that it needs to be challenged. So some of those things we talk about at the beginning of my classes. And then I often try to encourage thinking about Ubuntu. So one of the things I may do in a class is encourage students to draw a tree of some kind. And then on each part of the tree, just label, for example, the roots could represent a person's personal foundations. So that would be the people or the things that nourish you or that give you some support, kind of like we did at the beginning of this talk, recognizing that you are loved and that you love other things and other people and how important they are to you. And then the trunk of that tree, I would ask students to think about what are some of the influences and experiences that have shaped them. And then the branches, I would say, represent your life today. There could be a branch of representing your family and your job or your organizations that you belong to. And then those leaves could be your source of energy and information, such as the books that you read, the media that you're exposed to, the people that you get spiritual energy from. And then the fruits represent their accomplishments, like your achievements and your creative productions, the groups that you started up. And then, you could carry on the analogy. And even if you're not asked to do this in a class, it's probably a nice idea to do it just on your own, to remind yourselves about your hopes and your dreams. And that tree metaphor can be really helpful to think of different ways of you being connected. And so recognizing the power of stories, storytelling and dialogue are really critical, as I mentioned earlier on. And then also thinking of other ways of engaging, like, for example, through spoken word, through rapping, singing, even reading things together. So if we were together, I probably would have asked you to read the poem together with me. And engaging with creativity and curiosity are really important. And so, some low-tech technique that I use is using a cell phone, just a basic cell phone camera, and asking people to think about documenting different parts of their lives or important events that are happening. Maybe doing a study of a particular object and just being in the moment with that object, looking at the texture, the lighting, the shadows, taking pictures from different perspectives is kind of a meditative an appreciative activity. Keeping journals is an important part. I've asked students to keep group journals so that it's not just your own personal thoughts, but you may contribute to a journal that other classmates are contributing to. We've done songwriting. Some of you may be familiar with the Raging Grannies, and they are an adult education group where they dress up in the traditional stereotypical granny outfits with the floppy hats and the floral dresses, and they create songs around nuclear power, war, sexism, the environment, and then they sing in public places. So I've asked my students to, write their own songs and perform them in the classroom. So yeah, I guess those were just some examples that I wanted to share with you. And just going to go to the next slide, which again is attributed to Ashwani Kumar. He talks about, in spite of this deep psychological roots of racial problems, we primarily tend to focus on correcting them through political, economic, and legal measures. And this tendency to focus on the outer or the structural aspects of a problem rather than grasping its psychological roots is the most predominant way of understanding and approaching problems in all spheres of life, including the domain of education. And I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen there. And yeah, I just wanted to wrap up and yeah, hopefully give you a sense of hope in the need that we do need to make change. And particularly in the face of a pandemic and these ongoing inequities that I talked about, the violence that we see and the oppression that we have experienced and are witnessing, we've got to try something different and something new. So I will stop there and see if there are any questions.
That's great. Thank you very much, Susan, for such an inspiring presentation. That's very beautiful and nice to, to hear you as always. You're amazing and a wonderful scholar and a beautiful human being. Thank you so much for, for such an engaging presentation and such beautiful words. Yeah, so the floor is open. So whoever would like to ask, a question or make a comment, you can do so by using the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, or you can also use the chat box to write your question, or you can also raise your hand and we're going to give you the possibility for you to speak. You can definitely use any of these tools. So we have a comment from Mary, and Mary says, wonderful ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Definitely very good strategies that you introduced to us today here, Susan.
I'll say something, Marlon. Thank you, Susan, for the wonderful presentation. I really appreciated how you started your presentation with the breathing activity, because I found myself, once I did the breathing activity, this weight just lifted off my shoulders. I was stressed the whole entire day. I wasn't able to sleep last night. So my question is, how can we fight this feeling of exhaustion when society or where are our surroundings are telling us that we need to work so hard and keep pushing through our exhaustion?
Yeah, excellent question. And you're right. I feel that pressure myself all the time. As a professor, as a mother, as a community member, there's always this sense of urgency. And I guess really it's important to think about all of this busyness. The busyness is important because it may be making a huge difference, but if you're not looking after yourself, that busyness is for naught. And you can't be the best person that you can be when you are constantly being made busy. And so some of the strategies are to take time, particularly during the pandemic. I know we've had additional pressures like teaching online, learning online, meeting online. Like I stare at my computer screen hours and hours a day. But we need to make those times for our own mental health. And that means I spend an hour on yoga a day. I spend an hour walking a day. And then maybe 3 times a week, I'll do some weight training. And then there's times when I just sit back and listen to the radio, music, or watch TV. And you need to give yourself that permission. And I think a lot of what we do, this idea of busyness, comes from neoliberal ideas that are based around capitalism, that time is money. And we've got to let that go, because I often think if I'm on my deathbed, I'm not going to be thinking, oh, I should have published another paper. I should have marked that paper with a lot more detail and care. Or I should have had another meeting with that committee. Those are not, I hope, are not going to be on your mind as you are passing out of this world. Your loved ones, the things that bring you peace, I think that's going to be on your mind, maybe. I'm not predicting what will happen, but I think just keeping that in mind, keeping in mind what's important, and that the world is not going to fall apart if you step back and say, I'm not answering any emails for 2 days on the weekend. So that's my advice, Tiffany. I hope it makes sense.
Thank you so much, Susan. It makes so much sense. You know, as a student, I am emailing on the weekends, and I find it so hard to step away. But as you were saying, going outside, taking a walk every day, I run outside for an hour, and it does help tremendously. But as you were saying, it's that neoliberal capital mindset that time is money that just makes us be busy all the time. So thank you so much, Susan.
Anybody else would like to ask a question or make a comment? I have something to add myself as well, Susan. While you were speaking, one portion of your talk that really, resonated to me was when you said, "I declare that enough is enough," or I don't remember exactly the words you said, but I declare that it's time to change. I declare that we can't stand that anymore. And I think that's so interesting, and it really spoke to me in a sense that, yeah, we have to start declaring and saying that, yeah, it's time to change. We can't have that kind of paradigm anymore. So we have to change. So my question to you is, how can we carry on this message? So how can we communicate? How can we put it across? Being it in formal education or non-formal settings, how can we do that?
Great question. Yeah, and I do declare. I kind of build on that anger sometimes to say enough is enough. And I've heard people say, oh, you must be patient with us. We have to learn how to engage with anti-Black racism. And I say, no, you know what? You've had 400 years and more to make things more equitable. So now is the time for change. And the George Floyd death, I don't know how the rest of you felt, but when I watched that man be lynched on TV, it was so, it enraged me. And I thought, this cannot happen. And yet in my university and in other places, there was a silence on it. And I wrote a letter to my faculty association and I said, I am hurt, I am feeling pain. I don't know how the rest of you are feeling, but we need to talk. We need to engage. And then people started to, you know, show support, connect with me. And I felt like collectively, folks have come together and have helped to push for change. At Mount St. Vincent University, we have a hire for Black scholars, a cohort of 4 Black scholars. And as I said, being the only person of African descent on faculty in the education department, this is significant to me. So these steps are important to work at collectively. And one should never feel alone. One has to reach out and be honest, be vulnerable, and say how you're feeling. And one of the things that her name is Omi Share Dryden. She's at Dalhousie University, and in one of her talks, she said, if you have a classroom of all white students, you are supporting white supremacy. And when she said that, I thought, okay, that is profound, because some folks will say, no, you know, there's not enough Black people. It's because it's their fault. They're not coming in. And my point always to all the research I've done, it's not about blaming the people who are not coming into the university or coming into the institution. It's what is the institution not doing to make folks feel welcomed? And by folks, I mean not just Black, but Indigenous, immigrants, newcomers, refugees, the folks from the LGBTQ plus community. What are we doing that has to change? So yeah, I do get very frustrated, and I say all of these statements about how we're going to fight anti-Black racism, we're going to change the way that we teach. That's one thing, but you need to show what you're doing. Like, you can strategic plan all you like, but you must show action that supports those statements. Otherwise, they're empty and they're false. So I do really encourage students, like if you're in a class and you've got your course outline and everything on there, or most of it is by white folks, you have to ask the question to the professor. The professor should know better, but you might have to be the one to say, excuse me, where is the African Canadian perspective? Where are the women that I need to be reading? Where is the Indigenous perspective? So asking those critical questions, and again, if it has to be done collectively, that's talking to your classmates and collectively feeling empowered to be able to challenge the professor. So those are just some suggestions, but thanks for your question, Marlon.
Thank you. Thank you for such a wonderful idea and good strategies as well. That's great. Yep. So any other question from participants? You can raise your hand and I can unmute you, and you can also write the questions in the chat box. We have a few more minutes. Go ahead, Nivin. Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Susan, so much for this rich presentation and all of the information you provide us with. There's a sentence you said, nature keeps changing. And I believe that changing is one of the most notions that us as human beings makes us feel like it scares us a lot, because changing needs us to step out of our comfort zones, to sacrifice so many things, maybe to forget about stuff we love, and also challenging all of the the stigmas and the prejudices that are systemized in our brains and in our societies. So it's like, I believe that we are missing this message, especially nowadays. We are not taking any lesson from nature, and nature is actually, that makes me feel so sad that nature is not a part of our life anymore, and people just like forget about it, and like if we look at nature keeps changing every day in every season, and even the seasons give us a lesson. Because this is the core of our life. So what kind of lessons you would love to give us to learn from nature, especially nowadays, and how to help ourselves as adults to reconnect ourselves to nature, to get back to nature, to learn from the indigenous knowledge about land and all what comes with it. And thank you.
Yes, thank you, Naveen. That's a great question, and I'm glad you picked up on that little piece of wisdom that I feel we need to be looking to, and that's nature. And as you said, nature is changing all the time. It's evolving, and it's something that we are so afraid to acknowledge. I mean, we fight against aging, buying the creams and people getting things done to their bodies to keep youthful. And in fact, I think embracing change is something that we need to do. And again, that's nature's lesson. And also, a lot of our angst and anxiety is coming from global warming, and it's coming from this idea that the earth is changing. It will never be able to go back. And so I feel like the more we connect with nature, the more we can understand what we're doing to it and understand that we have a significant role in the way that the earth is moving. And I guess it's moving, it's constantly moving, but the idea that we need to recognize what we're doing to it. And you can't do harm to someone or something if it's your friend, if it's someone that you go to for sustenance, for peace, for comfort, for connection, for spiritual nurturing. You don't destroy your friend if you see them that as important to your life. So yeah, I would just say the more we are connecting with it in any small way, like even a person who lives in a high rise and it's a pandemic and they're told don't leave your building, people are turning to like a plant to them. They're connecting with it in a different way than they had in the past. They're not ignoring it. Maybe they're spending more time observing it. So connecting with nature can be a small thing, a small little walk, even a 15-minute walk sitting under a tree. So yeah, I really feel like we've got to do more in terms of helping our young people connect with nature right from day one. Be outside, stay outside, take time outside, learn outside. Take those lessons. And I feel like that's where our sense of peace will come from. And our anxiety has to lessen if we are connected to the planet.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much. So I think we are going to go to just like your final words, your final message, for us as graduate students transitioning to a new life, right? Post-pandemic, and hopefully things will be brighter in the future, right?
Yes, let's hope so. I have that hope.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Susan, for such a beautiful message. Is there anybody would like to say anything else? Professor Kennedy is saying something. Yeah, so I'll read what she's saying. So I'd like to thank the organizers, the volunteers, the presenter, and Rivka, the ASL interpreter, for a wonderful symposium with Doixa's first virtual GSDE. Be very proud of your work and take a good break tomorrow. Yes, we will. My voice is running out now. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Professor Kennedy. It means a lot to us. It's been, a wonderful journey. So far, it's tiring. We're exhausted, but we are very happy, with everything that we've been learning so far. Thank you so much. And yeah, so that's it. So we hope to see you next year again for 2022 GSDE. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be an amazing symposium. And yeah, that's it. Well, have a wonderful day, a wonderful evening, good weekend. And Susan, thanks again for being here. It means so much to us as well. It was an amazing presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you.